I am Shi Ying from the Department of Information Systems and Analytics here at the NUS School of Computing. I'm also your moderator for today. We have three very exciting presentations lined up. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box, and we'll take questions after all three presentations are completed. Okay. So it's now my pleasure to invite Professor Kim Sooyeon, Head of Department of Political Science, to present her research on the language of institutional design, text similarity, and preferential trade agreements. Sooyeon?
Good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction. Before I start, I'd like to thank Trisha Fung, my friend from Sooyeon, for inviting me to join this forum. I think it's terribly exciting. My neighborhood in social science has always been computational. However, it's only recently that I looked around and realized that there's another neighborhood on the other side, in a different discipline, equally interested in questions of social science. So this forum is an excellent opportunity, I think, for us to have more collaborations moving forward. I also want to give a small shout out to my first student from School of Computing, Huang Chen, who showed up at my door one day, wanted to talk about, analyzing Security Council debates. So I'm very excited to work with her as the first, my first thesis committee experience in School of Computing. This work, I hope you can all see my screen, is joined with a student of mine, Tia Gessen Pungundanar, who actually just started at the University of Chicago, the master's program in computational social science. So he'll be spending 1 year in, excuse me, getting training in computational social science, after which he'll spend another year working with a faculty member in political science. So I think it's a great marriage of the two disciplines. So Tia is not only supported, with a scholarship from the University of Chicago, but also from the Tan Kah Kee Foundation in Singapore. Without further ado, I'm going to go on to set up the research. So let me tell you a story about how research problem came to be formed. I was doing other work, coding trade agreements, which I have been doing for a number of years. And one day my RA comes to me and said, "Look, Prof, I found this." And as you can see, if we put both of these texts into Turnitin, you probably get like a similarity index of like 95%. Right? It clearly looks like the texts have been duplicated, copied, and pasted. And it makes sense, right? They're both EFTA agreements. So EFTA is a group of 4 countries. And these are the government procurement provisions, or at least part of it, with the Slovak Republic and Bulgaria. So you're putting aside the moment of why is it EFTA text become replicated in both these two agreements, we look at simply the similarity of text, which got me to thinking, right? Should they be similar? So we're talking about preferential trade agreements. Sorry, I sort of take it for granted. But these are government provisions from preferential trade agreements. And the question that arose from looking at this, examples of this, and I asked my students to do a deep dive into the text to identify more cases of such copying and pasting of provisions of trade agreements. And they found quite a few, actually, that I have in the paper. Right. So looking through literature on the use of, say, templates, right, or as a way of measuring similarity. The World Trade Report, which is published by the World Trade Organization, back in 2011 said there is a tendency to replicate trade opening rules in preferential trade agreements because template approaches are often used for PTAs. And this makes a lot of sense on the one hand. So governments use templates when they negotiate PTAs because they can advance specific trade liberalization agendas. For example, the US template for labor and environmental standards, which is a result of a state society bargain, right? The US government responding to pressures from domestic groups for labor and environmental standards that should be encoded into trade agreements. Right? The EU has a similar template for competition policy and trade agreements, right? Well, templates also cut negotiating costs. This is more sort of a kind of a joke, but yes, lawyers do not need to keep producing or drafting new agreements. Right? Once they have a good agreement with the right legal language, they can use it over and over again, and governments will be efficient in doing so. However, there are disagreements. There's an alternative agreement that some have argued that some PTAs are tailor-made. For example, when it comes to cultural provisions in EU PTAs, these are tailored to each case, as Arbia has argued from some time ago. All right. So my question in pursuing this study or this research problem is to ask, where is the variation? Where do agreements differ? All right. So some of the existing scholarship has looked at what's called main documents. right? The main treaty documents in a, because preferential trade agreements are international treaties, we can look for similarities in the main documents. And Ali and Elsig, for example, have found that main documents have high levels of similarity. So supporting the usage of templates by governments in negotiating trade agreements. So we can look at the main documents as templates more broadly, containing provisions or chapters on investment, government procurement, services, and whatnot, right? That often refer to large principles, often consistency with existing WTO agreements. On the other hand, annexes are a much more interesting animal. They contain exceptions, exemptions, exclusions, and tailor-made provisions. So annexes are, when annexes contain things where countries, for example, like Singapore, will refer to a specific legislation in exempting itself from, say, a provision in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And so these, in the language of international treaties, there's a parallel, right? In human rights treaties, oftentimes there are something called derogations, right, which countries take in order to take reservations, exemptions from their legal obligations in human rights treaties, right? So the expectation when we forward, if I separate it out, right, the main documents from the annexes, is that text similarity should be much higher for main documents, as shown in existing scholarship, but much lower for annexes because they refer to arrangements made for individual trade agreement partners, right? Okay. So an example of this, right? The Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, right, which became the CPTPP, actually had 30 main chapters, but it had 4 annexes, 2 on non-conforming measures, and numerous bilateral texts, which were negotiated amongst the 12 or 13 countries. All right. There was a separate US-Japan outcome, 2 different ones, and supplementary texts that were 3 times the size of the main document. So looking further at an earlier sample of 312 documents, we found that 217 had supplementary text, and of them, more than half had annexes that were far larger in quantity, right, number of pages, in words, whatnot, than the main document. Okay. So we proceeded to analyze using quantitative text analysis, right? Separate analyses of main documents and and annexes. And for my colleagues in computational social science who do quantitative text analysis, this is very vanilla flavored, right? So very standard stemming, pre-processing of data. We experimented with removing words that are in 100% of the text, 90% and 90%, in some ways to provide a more harder test, right, of the extent of similarity across the documents. We tried stemming, with lemmatizing. The text similarity measure we chose was a cosine similarity, a measure of pairwise document similarity based on word frequencies. All right. It is also non-directional in that the comparison of a document A with document B is the same as document B with document A. All right. I'm probably going a little fast, so I'm going to slow down a little bit while I present the results. So these are our histograms of similarity scores given for a given pair, right, of agreements. So we've got almost 400. Each of these is paired. All right, so we have the similarity across 2 documents, and the histogram basically plots the frequency of different similarity scores. So the top gives you the similarity scores for the main texts, where you have, say, the main text, all of it, where we have remove text common words from, so all words that are common in all agreements beyond the stop words, right? Main text with 90% of common words removed, main text with 90% of common words removed. So these are the main texts, and these are the figures for the annexes, right? Green for main and yellow or brown for the annexes. As you can see, in each case, there's a difference. Right, so the similarity, right, text similarity in annexes is far lower than in the main documents, and you can see this across the different sort of percentages of words that are common, the common words that are removed. All right, I have separate results. This is when we use stemming. Right, when we use stemming. So we get similar parallel results in terms of annexes having less similarity. And certainly you can see it in the distribution here, right, where it's clustered. So the lower end, lots less, there are many more observations with lower similarity scores. Now the results get more interesting, and I think that is harder once we lemmatize the texts. And probably some of it, we probably need to look back at the lemmatization. Very good. Okay, so I was here, I think, in the discussion of lemmatized main text and annexes, a comparison of the cosine similarities. Right. So I'm going to assume that you heard everything I was saying right before I was cut off and move on to the next. So what is interesting also in this is that we tried to, of course, we tried various ways of figuring out if there's any more patterns, right, to the similarities. And the most interesting thing we found is an overtime variation. So as you can see, right, in the main texts. So this goes from, the earliest days to, I think it's 2016, 2018, pretty close, right? So what you see is that similarity of agreements that are signed in these years tends to increase over time. So the usage of templates has been increasing over time, and especially in this century. At the same time, what we found is that the cosine similarity in the annexes has declined over time. Right. Also very interesting. And this one uses, right. This one uses the. This one uses. I think this is the main analysis. That's right. One more interesting feature is in this one. So the other thing we did was we looked at the similarity of agreements that were signed after major milestones in global trade governance. So first we have the GATT here, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which is the precursor, right, to the World Trade Organization, where we see similarity index and the similarity score, the average or the median similarity scores for the main text versus the annexes. What's interesting, of course, is that this one, right, this is the Uruguay round, which is the last trade round that happened under the GATT, started in 1986 and led to the establishment of the World Trade Organization. So all the agreements, right, signed after 1986 tend to go up in similarity, right? Same here, with the annexes go up in similarity, right? And then it gets further, right, further increased once we enter the WTO era. So here we look at the agreements that are signed in the Doha era. So the Doha round, which is the only multilateral round trading negotiations that were ever launched under the World Trade Organization, took place in 2001. Right, we know that it failed, and there was no actually trade agreement, multilateral trade round under the World Trade Organization. So the literature has given a lot of attention to the role of preferential trade agreements in taking over governance of trade since then. And what we see from our analysis is that agreements have become much more similar. Certainly the main text and the templates for liberalization have become much more similar. At the same time, we see a major decline in the annexes, which means that individual arrangements, exemptions, exclusions, reservations, and carve-outs are also becoming increasingly more popular through the annexes. So it's an interesting way to look at the divergent paths of trade liberalization and their exceptions. All right. So in terms of conclusions so far, right, we have the two questions: are preferential trade agreements templates, or are they tailor-made? What I've shown you from our findings so far, from our analysis so far, is that text similarity across these agreements much higher for the main texts than for the annexes. So main texts, remember, are templates for trade liberalization that are centered on general governance areas, whereas annexes are tailor-made for the trade partners involved in the agreement. And they are a very important source of variation in PTAs. I've also shown that over time patterns, there's an increasing convergence in the main text, especially in the WTO era without a successful multilateral trade round, but there is increasing divergence in annexes, which reflects continued protection, most likely, of important sectors in PTAs on the part of governments. Right. So moving forward, right, we have some work still under preparation that I do not really have time to show you. But of course, we want to know what's in the trade agreements, what's in the main text, what's in the annexes, what are the major topics. So we are right now we've undertaken some topic modeling on the main text for versus the annexes. And perhaps if you have this form again, I'll show you the next set of results. All right. So the other question, of course, is to move from the topics and the texts to the agents, who are the governments. All right. So who are the governments that are signing what kinds of agreements, and do they look alike? And which countries tend to sign the most similar agreements, right? So we are using our similarity scores to do some, multinational scaling and some clustering to determine the proximity of countries insofar as their trade agreement treaties, the similarity of treaties are concerned. The other question, of course, is who are the influencers? You might think that the US, say, is a major influencer, maybe so, but US has very few agreements compared to other countries, right? Chile is certainly another one, got more than 24. All right, so what we hope to do is, again, using the text analysis we have so far as a foundation, conduct network analysis to identify the influential countries moving forward. So thank you very much. I look forward to your feedback and any comments, suggestions you might have for our way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sooyeon. Okay, next up, we have Dr. Jin Chen from the Department of Information Systems and Analytics, who will share with us his study on the phenomenon of faking orders on e-commerce platforms.
Okay, great. So let me get started. All right. So good afternoon. I'm Jin Chen from DISA. It is a great pleasure to share our research in this forum. This is a joint work with Sooyeon from UC Berkeley Haas School of Business and Kartik Hosanaga from UPenn, the Wharton School of Business. This work is about the faking order practice, which is prevailing in most e-commerce platforms. At the core of this research is the notion called brushing. And it refers to the practice where online merchants place fake orders of their own products to inflate sales volume and move up the search results. And here is how it works. There were professional third-party brushers, and merchants were first reach out to them, and then these professional brushers will place orders and make payments using the money they have received from the merchants. And then the merchants will ship out empty parcels or boxes of worthless items. And after that, brushers will get compensated, and the fake transactions increase the sales volume of the merchants, enabling their products to rank high in the search results. As a practice, brushing is witnessed on many major e-commerce platforms around the world, like Alibaba, Amazon, and Jingdong.com, etc. As a phenomenon, it has also received widespread press coverage from major media such as Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Forbes. And most recently, if you have been following the news, those unsolicited packages of mysterious seeds have really brought the issue of brushing back to the fore, and if anything, to a whole new level. Since May this year, Amazon has banned over 50,000 Chinese online merchants because of alleged manipulated reviews and sales volume. And some of these sellers have made $1 billion revenue in 2020. And this phenomenon has become so contentious that one of the authors recently got approached by the South China Morning Post to comment on this practice. Now, to give you a bit of an idea about how pervasive brushing is, now Alibaba had found that 1.2 million merchants on Taobao, or about 17% of all of the vendors, had faked 500 million transactions that worth 10 billion RMB in the year of 2013 alone. But many believe that this was just a conservative estimate and only the tip of the iceberg. At this moment, a natural question pops up. Why do sellers brush? I would like to share with you these quotes, which really give us a hint of what is going on under the hood. The first quote is from a Taobao merchant, and he or she says, "How do you get yourself noticed by customers in the sea of products if you don't have a single sale?" And this is very much echoed by the second quote from another Taobao merchant, which is, "Without fake transactions, your product will end up at the very back of the search results, and people were never going to be able to find it." And last but not least, here is a quote from an industry observer. "The difference between being at the top of a page of results and buried at the bottom is night and day. And brushing is a very tempting shortcut." So in the eyes of online merchants and industry observers, brushing almost becomes a necessary evil. These quotes consistently review one fundamental motivation of brushing, which is consumers face search frictions and thus often only consider prominent products that rank high in the search results. And at the same time, the platform's ranking algorithm tends to give more visibility to products with higher sales volume. And thus, this is a feedback loop between the sales and ranking. A higher ranking drives more sales due to search frictions, which in turn leads to a higher ranking due to the ranking algorithm. And therefore, the merchants are naturally under the pressure to rack up fictitious sales to boost rankings in the search results. And this search ranking perspective is at the heart of brushing. And notice that this is not the only reason for why sellers brush. And in practice, we can see at least another two factors. The second and the third one here have to do with influencing how consumers evaluate a product. So sellers may rely on faking sales volume to signal its quality, help them generate glowing fake reviews that look more credible because they are backed by transaction records. And this may bias the consumer's perception, deceiving consumers into believing the products are better than they actually are. Now, our research focused on the first factor, which has to do with whether the customers can see the product in the first place, due to the ranking algorithm that heavily relies on the sales records. The customers have to be able to observe the product first before they can even evaluate the product. Our research questions are, the first and foremost, how do sellers strategically brush in this competitive environment? And more importantly, what is the impact of brushing on the consumer welfare? Here, we take a consumer-centric view and explore three sets of questions. First, platforms always say that they have no tolerance for brushing. They use sophisticated machine learning and data analytics tools to combat the practice. Now, given the platform's proclaimed commitment to combating brushing, and to the extent that brushing is hard to eliminate, well, consumers necessarily benefit if brushing is made more difficult. And second, given that consumers' search frictions are responsible for the occurrence of brushing, well, a lower search cost necessarily dampen the brushing incentives and improve the consumer welfare. And third, given the sales volume plays a critical role in determining the ranking of products, how much should they be weighted in the ranking algorithm? Should the ranking track the cumulative sales records or only the most recent history? To address these research questions, we built an analytical model that describes the consumer search process, the sales ranking evolution, and the brushing game between the online merchants. We considered two competing sellers, H&L, on an e-commerce platforms that selling products H&L respectively. The sellers operate over 2 periods, and our model is readily to extend it to multiple periods. In each period, there is one customer arrives, and each customer's net valuation of product I is VI plus epsilon if it fits her preference, and VI minus epsilon otherwise. So each product independently fit each consumers with probability gamma. And upon arrival, each consumer knows her own VI, which is the prior value that she attaches to product I, but does not know the match value epsilon. So basically, the consumers do not know if the product fits her preference or not ex ante. And consumers are also heterogeneous in terms of their prior value. So alpha percent of the consumers attach a higher prior value V bar to the H product, and 1 minus alpha percentage of the consumers attach a lower prior value of the underlying to H product. And this alpha is greater than a half. So one of the product is more popular than the other. But neither consumers nor the platforms know which product is more popular. Upon arrival, the consumer is presented with an ordered list of these two products. So basically, it's a ranking list. And to resolve the uncertainty about the matched value, each consumer will conduct a costly sequential search. So each customer would incur a search cost for the product that she searches. And after the search, she knows whether the product fits her preference or not, and thus become aware of her net valuation of each product. The search cost of a bottom-ranked product is C, and that of a top-ranked product is normalized to 0. And searching a lower-ranked product presumably involves more search cost, as consumers scroll down navigate, or flip pages. And this assumption is supported by many empirical findings, and it parsimoniously captures a ranking effect whereby a higher ranked product has more visibility and thus attracts more consumers' attention. And after the consumers search the top ranked product, she needs to decide whether to purchase it or search the low ranked product. And if both products are searched, she purchased the one with the higher net valuation. And exactly one product is purchased at the end of each period. So this is the consumer's search process or value discovering process. And next, we describe how the product rankings are generated. In each period, the platform will update the product rankings and arriving consumers can see according to a ranking score, SI, which has 3 components. The first part is the sales volume related factors. So here we can see this NI is the product I's cumulative sales to date. And this lambda in front of NI is the weight of the sales volume in the ranking score. So this whole term includes sales volume itself and other related, closely related metrics. So based on a study on Wall Street Journal, it is estimated that the sales volume contributes 25% of the ranking. And besides, other metrics like fake reviews are also positively correlated with the sales volume. So this part is susceptible to manipulation. And the second part is the sales volume unrelated factors, like the seller's offline reputation that the platform gathers from various sources. So this part is much more costlier to manipulate compared with the online sales volume. And the third part is the noise, which captures the fact that the information that the platform collected is imperfect. And this noise is assumed to be following an extreme value type 1 distribution. And the sellers will play a brushing game to compete for the top ranked positions. And notice that the fake orders, they are costly, and the real orders, they're rewarding. A cost CB is incurred for faking 1 unit of order. And this CB captures the physical cost of processing fake transactions and compensating the third-party professional brushers. And also it reflects the difficulty of brushing in light of the regulatory environment. For instance, heftier penalties and tougher audits may make brushing harder. And the sellers will earn a unit reward for selling 1 unit product to real customers. We assume that both sellers will fake orders at the start of the game, and then the rank will be updated based on the algorithm in the previous slides. And after that, the real customers enter the system and make a choice based on his or her value discovery process explained before. And then the rank will be updated again, and then the second customers enters the system and make a choice. Now, in the extensions, we can extend these model to multiple periods, and the sellers can also fake orders in the start of the second period. The seller's brushing strategy is to decide the propensity to fake 1 unit of sales, which is denoted by QI. And in a multi-period model, the sellers can decide whether to fake 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. units of sales. So both sellers, they will maximize their own total expected profit, which leads to an Nash equilibrium. So now let's talk about the results. Now, based on our model, it implies that when the search cost is low, then neither sellers will fake orders regardless of how inexpensive brushing is. And this is because under such low search frictions, the consumers are immune to the ranking effect. They can always search both products and find out their favorite one. And hence, manipulating the ranking through faking orders would be futile for the sellers. And when the search cost is no longer low, the consumers may not search the low-ranking product, and therefore the brushing costs start to play a crucial role in shaping the equilibrium. It is intuitive that when the faking order is costless, then both sellers will fake orders with no doubt. But when the faking order is costly, then neither sellers will fake order. The most intriguing case is when the cost of faking order is intermediate. Then both sellers will brush with certain probability. So they are playing a mixed strategy equilibrium. In particular, when the brushing cost is intermediate, the H seller's brushing propensity decreases with the brushing cost, but the L seller's brushing propensity increases with the brushing cost. So here in this graph, the horizontal axis is the brushing cost and the vertical axis is the brushing propensity. The black solid line is for the seller H and the blue dashed line is for seller L. So due to seller H's advantage in popularity, the sales-based ranking system is biased in favor of seller H in the sense that it is more likely to push seller H to the top at the start of the subsequent periods. And thus, seller H has a defensive incentive and brushes to defend its advantage. By contrast, seller L has an offensive incentive and sees brushing as the only opportunity to challenge seller H's entrenched position. When the brushing cost is high, the seller H decides brushing is not worth it and chooses to rest on its laurel, which in turn gives seller L a stronger brushing incentive, as there is nothing to lose for seller L. Now, as the brushing cost decreases, the brushing becomes attractive to both sellers, and in that case, anticipating the strategy of the counterparty, and given the fact that the ranking algorithm naturally favors seller H, the seller L will realize that this armor race is not worthwhile, which deters seller L from brushing aggressively. So the key insight here is the popularity disadvantage of seller L compels it to go the other way by acting strategically. So the seller L marches ahead with brushing when doing so is expensive, but backs off on brushing when doing so is cheap. And now we turn to the impact of the brushings on consumer welfare, and specifically the brushing cost. So we try to answer the three research questions we have raised before. Here, the horizontal axis is the brushing cost, and the vertical axis is the consumer welfare. This graph displays a similar pattern as the seller's brushing equilibrium strategy shown in the previous slides. And recall that when the brushing cost is intermediate, the seller H's brushing propensity decreases with the brushing cost, but the seller L's brushing propensity increases with the brushing cost. And thus, when the brushing cost is intermediately low, okay, so like this part, the seller H brushes more, and the consumer welfare is higher, since H is a more popular product. But as the brushing cost increases, the seller L starts to brush more than the seller H, and hence the consumer welfare decreases, which is shown by this blue dashed line. And this leads to the first insight, which is making brushing more difficult may actually hurt consumers. And second, for comparison, we also plot the consumer welfare under a random ranking system, which is this red line. And the random ranking system does not utilize any information and hence is immune to the brushing activity. We can see from this graph, increasing the brushing cost may hurt consumers so bad that it is even worse than the random ranking system. And the managerial implication for the platforms is that it should really caution against an unintended consequence of tougher regulations against the brushing. So if you cannot eradicate the brushing by imposing a heftier brushing cost, then making the brushing more difficult may backfire and hurt consumers. And now let's turn to the second research questions, the impact of the search cost. The conventional wisdom would say that the lower search cost would benefit consumers because it encourages more search, facilitates value discovery, and this will reduce the ranking effect and make brushing less meaningful. However, we found that this is not always the case. And in particular, reducing the search cost can reduce the consumer welfare in the sales-based ranking system even without brushing. And this is due to the search externalities that early consumers imposed on later consumers. While facilitating more search by early consumers always benefit early consumers themselves, it may nevertheless hurt the interest of later consumers by pushing the wrong product to the top if the consumers do not agree on what they like. And luckily, this is only a short-term distortion that will be corrected in the long run. But what may persist in the long run is the distortion that occurs once brushing kicks in. So reducing the search cost disincentivizes brushing across the board, but it can disproportionately affect sellers of different type, which may also ultimately harm the interest of consumers in some case. So the implication here is that the improved search technology is not a panacea. The platforms also need to consider interactions among consumers and, more importantly, the strategic response of sellers to the change of search cost. And finally, we look at the impact of the weight of sales volume in the ranking algorithm on the consumer welfare. In general, the consumer welfare is non-monotone in the weight of the sales volume. On the one hand, placing more weight on the sales volume related factors can reinforce the platform's knowledge about consumer preference, helping push the product edge to the top, benefiting later consumers. But on the other hand, more emphasis on these sales volume related factors also increases the seller's incentive to brush. And this trade-off leads to this non-monotone pattern. And this result shows that the incorporation of the sales volume related factors can be a double-edged sword. It may not always be a good idea to eliminate these factors from the ranking algorithm altogether, nor is it always recommended that the product ranking be purely based on these factors. And rather, the platform may find it beneficial to fine-tune the weight of the sales volume related factors in the ranking algorithm. Now, our model has made various implications to tease out different driving forces and to obtain clean insights, but many of them, they are not critical, and relaxing these assumptions do not alter the main results qualitatively. Now, as a summary, we studied a growing practice on e-commerce platforms known as brushing. And the main driver for brushing are the search frictions that consumers are always facing and the sales-based ranking algorithm that are widely adopted in many e-commerce platforms. And in this paper, we tell 3 cautionary tales as the managerial implication. The effort to combat brushing may backfire and unintentionally hurt consumers. And making search easier may reduce customers' welfare. And over and under emphasizing on the weight of the sales volume in the ranking algorithm may reduce the consumer welfare as well. Now, the crux of this problem is that we're living in an era that is increasingly data-driven and increasingly data-dependent. We are obsessed with data. We measure performance by data. We test algorithm against the data, and we learn from data. However, our very reliance on data may sometimes create a distortion in data itself, which is often neglected. Okay, on that note, I would like to conclude my talk. If you want to know more about this research, you can scan the QR code to find the paper. And thanks so much for your greatest attention.
Thank you, Jin Chen. Your talk has certainly made me second guess my shopping decisions online now. Okay, next we have Prof. Huang Ke-Wei, also from the Department of Information Systems and Analytics, will be presenting his work on the regional spillover effects of university AI research on the creation and performance of AI startups. Okay, Ke-Wei.
So good afternoon, everyone. So it's my honor to present my paper today. And this is a joint work co-authored with my most senior PhD student, Wang Qi, and she's graduating this year. So the topic is exploring the locational spillover effects of AI publications at university to the creation and the performance of AI startup. So the flow of today's talk is quite typical. So I'll provide some motivation, a very brief literature review, and then go over the data and the empirical results of this study. So the motivation is clear. So starting from maybe 5 to 10 years ago, there are a lot of shocking and surprising success of modern AI technologies. I think the one of the earliest example probably is the IBM Watson. He can outperform human beings in Jeopardy game show. Then later, very soon, there is Google AlphaGo, right? You can beat the human beings in the Chinese Go chess game. And then in recent years, the driverless car is already started to be commercialized and experimented all over the world. There are also news about the there are virtual anchors who can say on TV, it looks like a real human being, and then also can report news like human beings. And just 3 days ago, this is a bit small, and I just saw the news, so I added here. So Elon Musk, Tesla, he also demo a robot. It's not a Hollywood movies. So he demo a robot can walk around, and that's just a very, very recent news 3 days ago. So a lot of success and the booming AI applications lead to the global interest in investments in AI. So the amount is 3.9 trillion, expected to be 3.9 trillion, and all over the world, governments started to have various kind of policies to build up the AI ecosystems. So the important components of the AI ecosystems are university research, right, and AI startup, corporate large companies, their investment in AI, and also the training of AI talents, engineering students or computer science students, and also the related regulations. So the focus of our study is the university research and the AI startup. So especially I gave you some more examples. The Singapore government, they also have a very, very recent news. They invest 50 million more Singapore dollars to encourage AI research and cybersecurity. In US, they also have a lot of these kind of investments. So the motivation of the study is, say, the key assumption of this kind of policy is university AI research, it must have some kind of positive benefits on the economics development, right? Otherwise, say, government shouldn't invest so much money to encourage university research. At the same time, I've always wondered, there's so many papers in any areas. So now all of the AI papers are high quality. And also some of the high quality AI papers, they are very theoretical. It doesn't seem to have direct commercial values. So the motivation for me is really out of my part of the research motivation is my own curiosity. What kind of AI research matters, and does this AI research matters? So the other angle is government also try to, especially the Singapore government, also try to encourage AI startup, AI entrepreneurship by bringing startup from other countries, or try to encourage local students to fund startups. But we all know the AI startup rate is, the failure rate is very, very high. So encouraging the success rate, or say successful startup, I think it's much more important than just encouraging new startups. So how is the success rate of the AI startup, and how does it relate it to the nearby universities' AI research? That's also one of the motivation of our study. So given all of this background information, the high-level research question we propose is whether and which type of university AI research it has positive spillover effect to the nearby, say, number and the quality of AI startup. So there are a lot of related literature, and typically the researcher, they study research output from universities. Research outputs, most of the papers, they focus on patents. Some of the papers, they do academic publications or students. And also the research already showed that, roughly speaking, location matters. Say the university patents, papers, or students, they have local benefits to the, say, companies in the nearby area. So because of the time, so I won't go into the details of the literature. So the compared to the existing literature, the gap is there are a lot of papers, but most of them, they either study the generally any kind of research, or somehow they focus more on the biomedicine research. Yeah, but there's almost no research, to the best of our knowledge, that's about AI research or even computer science research. So that's one gap. The second gap is earlier, probably because of the availability of data. So most of the research, they only studied the number of startups. They didn't study the quality or performance, survival of the startup. So that's a minor gap we're trying to fill. And more importantly, also the theme and the topic of this paper is, say, what kind of AI startup AI research that's more correlated or more relevant to the success of startups. And clearly, the existing literature cannot tell us anything about that, right? So it doesn't tell us subfields of AI, which one is more important. And also in general, we also doesn't learn from the literature. So whether theoretical research versus applied research, which one is more useful? And also, does the interdisciplinary research really matters more, have more positive benefits? And does the second tier, third tier publication matters in this context? So those are the more important research questions we try to analyze in this study. Okay, so more specifically, we try to analyze the different type of AI research: machine learning, data mining, computer vision, natural language processing. Which one matters more, has stronger positive effect? And we will also analyze theoretical AI versus applied AI research. And also, does interdisciplinary AI research matters? And does the paper with more citation counts and the low citation counts, which one matters? And how much is the difference? So those are the issues we're going to analyze. Okay, so I think this is similar to what I already mentioned. So the data set. So one unique data set we find is a website called csrankings.com. So it has very detailed data, yearly number of CS publications in top conferences. And for each one of the faculty member of all of the university all over the world. So it's very easy for us to, from this website, we can consolidate the number of publications of each university in each conference and create a panel data for analysis. So on the website, the conference is only the very, very top conference. So only the top 1 to 3 in each small area. So they count they split the CS research area into 4 first level areas: AI, system theory, and others. So we focus only on the AI. So under the AI, there are 5 subfields: general AI, computer vision, machine learning, and the data mining, natural language processing, and the web and the information retrieval. So in total, we collect the data for 175 US companies. Those universities publish at least 1 paper in this top conference during the sample period. So the top conference, just to give you some example, this is a real interface from the website. So for example, the AI, probably for those of you not familiar with the publication outlets in AI, it sounds confusing. So these 2 are the general purpose AI conference, AAAI and the IJCAI. They are the top 2. And also they are more applied compared to top conference like machine learning, ICML, and the NIPS. They are more theoretical, and the researchers need to publish new algorithms rather than just try to, some of the other conferences, the accepted paper could be more applied. But the machine learning conferences, they are more theoretical, or you need to propose new algorithms. Okay, so these are the examples. These are not the example. These are really the full list of conferences counted in our study. And this is the interface of the website. So for the data about AI startups, we collect from crunchbase.com, which is more commonly used in recent years in this kind of research about entrepreneurship. So we can know the startup information about their founding day, headquarter location, which is very important for us because we study in the location no spillover effect, number of employees, founders, the education background of the founder, and our dependent variable, the total amount of VC fund, and the number of VC deals of each startup. So and we filter. So crunchbase.com is for all of the startups. So we identify AI startups by a series of AI keywords in their company description. So in our research, AI startup is broadly defined as any companies they may use AI technology. They build AI technology. It could be they are not really a technology company. They just, in their business model, AI is an important component. So in total, we collected the data for 4,500 AI startups during the sample period. And we focus only on the USA. So for both university and also the startup, all of them, they are in USA. So we also collect some of the additional variables. So let me move faster. So the dependent variable, we analyze 3 cases: the number of startups in each MSA. So MSA level is a region smaller than state, larger than city. And we also analyze the number of deals, number of VC deals, and amount of VC investment in each MSA per year. So all of these numbers are cumulative number. And in our full paper, we also analyze the say the new startup and so on. So the key independent variable is here, the spillover effect. So it's at the MSA level. So we count, say for each university, if they are close to the center of the MSA, close enough, for example, 50 miles, then we will count their publication. And we also change the threshold from 50 to 100, 150, 200, and 250 miles to see how the location, the distance may affect the impact of AI research on nearby startup. So if the if the universities is located close enough to the MSA, we count all of their publications. Otherwise, we don't count the publications. So there are several formulas. We try other formulas. Okay, and the publication is the number of publications in each university in each year. So we also try different subset of the publication. So we also include some of the typical control variables, and the econometrics model is quite standard. We didn't have a very complicated identification strategy or structural equation modeling. It's a panel regression. And we also estimate by other estimation methods. So the dependent variable, there are 3 cases I mentioned. And also the key independent variable is the spillover effect. Okay, so let's see the results. So the first, this table, the DV is the number of startup. So the key variable is the spillover variable. So you can see when the distance is longer, then it becomes not significant. So within 50 miles is very significant. 100 miles is still significant, and then 150 miles, then it started to not significant, and also the value is quite small. So the first one is the benchmarking case, where we don't care about the distance between university and MSA. We just use the number of publications in each MSA level and then run the regression. So you can see the effect is much smaller. Again, it shows the distance really plays some role in this analysis. And also the results for the amount of VC investment is also similar. So these two are quite significant, but larger than 150 miles, it becomes not significant. And the preview of our results, in most of our analysis, the number of startups is much easier to be predicted or explained. For example, the R square is very high. You can see 60 something, but the VC amount is much lower. Okay, and then also less significant variables. Okay, so that's the like baseline finding. We analyze different subsets of the AI paper, which I'm really curious and I want to know the answer when I first studied this research. So we will analyze each subset of the AI papers and also interdisciplinary or not theoretical versus applied, the research impact, high citation, low citation, and we see what's the difference in the spillover effect. So this one is for different field. So we really try different version, different test. Usually the machine learning is really much more significant than any other types of conference publications. And usually AI, AAAI or IJCAI, those two conference publications matters the least. So you can see all of them, they are significant, but the machine learning is the highest. This one is the smallest. The DV is the number of startup, okay? And for the amount of VC amount, so it's less significant. So the AAAI and the IJCAI becomes not significant. So again, the machine learning, the two top conferences in machine learning are still the most significant and also much more significant than the other conferences. These 3, 2, 3, 5, they are similar, right, in terms of the size. And a little bit surprising is natural language processing top conferences, it always matters relatively less. Which is a little bit counterintuitive. Yeah. And the second extension is about interdisciplinary effect. So because I'm running a little bit out of time, so this is our measure, and we can split the publication into high interdiscipline or low interdiscipline. So this part is the part we really have some simple text mining to calculate the similarity of the topic of the paper. So let's see the results. So for the let's just focus on this one. So because this is the within the CS, whether it's interdiscipline, right? It could be a paper both about CV and NLP. So this one is the real interdiscipline we have in mind. So we can see interdisciplinary paper really have higher positive effect, especially when its VC amount is not significant for the low interdisciplinary paper. Yeah, so that's this one. And the last, the number 3 and the number 4 extension, we analyze theoretical papers versus applied papers. This is inspired by machine learning conference have more significant results. So by the keywords of each conference publication, we classify them into theoretical paper or not theoretical paper. And we can see theoretical paper surprisingly has much higher positive impact than applied paper, because from the, especially from government policymakers' viewpoint, probably they like the applied paper much more than those theoretical papers. But our result shows the opposite. But for the VC amount, it doesn't matter. Both are not significant. And then the difference of the coefficient is not very large. For the high research impact and low research impact, we just count the citations. Say we know the citations of each paper. So we split it into 2 sets, high citation versus low citation. So we can see that the high citation paper, again, it matters more for number, but both are not significant for the VC amount of the investment. So, so again, we summarize our findings. We can show there are indeed positive effects of regional knowledge spillover from university research, AI research to the nearby creation, which means the number of startups, and also more or less their performance in terms of VC financing. And we also find that there are heterogeneity in the positive effects. Different AI subfields, they may have different, say, stronger or weaker spillover effect. We find that interdisciplinary research really have stronger effect, and also knowledge spillover from a theoretical paper and the paper have more citation, they have stronger positive effects. Okay, so this, and so our practical, the practical implications of our research for the AI entrepreneurs is, since it matters if you are located nearby top university in AI, then it helps. For policymakers, this can tell us government should still focus more on the foundational AI research, high quality AI research. Similar to our performance evaluation, we should focus on top conferences. The second tier, third tier conference probably doesn't matter. We don't analyze it, but even from our analysis, we can see that for among the top 15 conference, the lower tier one already doesn't matter that much. That's where I can reach the conclusion. Okay, so I think the last slide, the future work. This paper we analyze at a high level. I'm also quite curious if it helps, if the AI research helps, how does it help? So we didn't analyze the underlying mechanism. There are several possible ways, right? I listed here. And in the future, hope we can have some research to study what is the underlying mechanism for the positive spillover effect. For example, it could be the researcher. They really collaborate with the startup. They founded a startup, right? In some way, they directly collaborate with the startup. So their research knowledge and the output can be used by the startup. And the second mechanism, I think probably is more likely, is the students. So the researcher with top publication, they are the one know the state of art and also more complicated knowledge rather than just some coding or put together some packages. So the students from undergrad, master to PhD student learn from those top researchers are better and more unique in the job market. Those are the important mechanism benefit the nearby startup. The third mechanism could be there are more conference, right? Like us, we have the academics, seminars, workshop, tutorial session, training programs for the local startup nearby the university. That could be another mechanism why when the university have a lot of top AI publication, there are more startup and also more successful startup in the nearby region. So that's all for my talk today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ke-Wei. So we now open the floor for questions. I do see some online, so I'll ask our speakers that in chronological order. I see that Sooyeon has answered some online. Okay, so Jin Chen, we have a question for you.
Yes.
Regarding search costs. It's a question from Ziwei. So if search cost is the same across two types of consumers? And if it is, will there be a difference in results if the search cost is different?
Okay, it's a great question. So actually, this is one of the extensions that we didn't, solve. Okay, so here in the base model, yes, the search costs for the two types of consumers are the same. Now, if they are not the same, I believe that as long as both of them agree that the top-ranked product has a lower search cost than the bottom-ranked, then the results won't change qualitatively.
Okay. Okay. And then we have another question from Ziwei for Ke-Wei. Do you consider the superstar effect, under which the publications of one particular author may have significant explanatory power on AI knowledge spillover via his PhD student or industrial links?
Okay, yeah, thank you. So we didn't analyze it that way. Of course, it's possible. Yeah, we analyze at the university level, and actually we analyze even at the higher level, which is the MSA level rather than university level to follow the literature. So it could be because of few superstars, rather than just because of the whole university. And also, I think our analysis more or less pointing to that, because our analysis shows that the top conference, right, the highly cited paper matters more. And those are usually from the few superstar professors and their students. Yeah.
Thank you, Ke-Wei. Okay, then we have a question. We have a question for Sooyeon. It's a question from Stanley. So Stanley said, "Interesting talk. Could your findings indicate that PTAs have become more sophisticated with nuances and intricacies being pushed into the annexes?"
Thank you, Stanley. Nice to meet you. So definitely the intricacies, what you call the intricacy, the nuances, definitely being pushed into the annexes. I see them mostly as ways for governments to continue to protect very sensitive sectors and that are also politically very powerful. Right? Are the PTA main texts becoming more sophisticated? There is some indication that there are model PTAs out there, and yes, there are more and more provisions that go into areas where we call WTOX, go beyond the kinds of trade obligations or commitments that we see in the existing international agreements, for sure. But the text analysis itself does not yet give this information. I only know it from just following the way that trade agreements have evolved over time.
Thank you, Sooyeon. Okay, so feel free to put in more questions. So Sooyeon, as a follow-up question, right? So in terms of your similarity across time, so do you see any changes in topics, for instance, like as they become more convergent, right? Is it because topics have been dropped to Stanley's point, are they being pushed to the annexes? Or is there more of a kind of learning over time where you push some of these things from the annexes into the main text so that there is some agreement and consensus?
Thank you. So I think there is definitely learning. I think the learning comes from realizing that agreements are needed in areas that have not been out of the purview of the World Trade Organization, existing agreements. And so you've got to put them somewhere, right? And trade agreements then become the main venue or the main institutional mechanism for this kind of coordination.
Okay, there's a question for Jin Chen as well. So how is this brushing phenomenon different than, let's say, advertising or sponsorships, where I'm just going online and trying to manipulate my ranking, right? Okay, and what can consumers do about brushing?
Okay. Yeah, this is a very good question. Yes, sponsor search and advertising is also one way to get the product in front of the customer's eyes. Yes, but there is some evidence. It has been found that according to some sellers, they say that the price for the advertisement in competitive product category has been rising for like 10% and 20% yearly. And that makes them unaffordable for small online merchants. And the reason for why this sponsored advertisement becomes more and more expensive, that is because they are short in supply. So typically, there is only a very limited number of advertisement slots for them to bid. So this explains why their cost is increasing. Well, a merchant who does not want to pay the money to win the sponsor search, if they decide to brush, arguably or presumably they can always brush a little bit. So this effect is always incremental. So that is probably one reason why a lot of sellers, they engage in brushing rather than pay for this advertising cost. And there is another reason is in order to buy those advertisements, they also have to think about what is the set of optimal set of keywords to bid. Right. So, but this can if they choose a broader class of keywords, then that could waste a lot of their marketing budget. But in terms of Russian to fake sales volume, then they don't have this kind of problem. So that is probably a second reason why Russian is very welcomed by these sellers compared with the sponsor search.
So let me back up a bit and kind of ask a question to all three speakers, right? So we have folks from the industry who are in the audience. And so kind of working with archival data, what are some of the limitations or benefits you've seen in the work that you've done? Or what are some of the challenges? Ke-Wei, do you want to go first?
Oh, okay. So for me, I think it's very common for the type of my work. Usually it's secondary data and also similar to economics research. So our data set typically is at a higher level, like front level. So it's very difficult to tease out, to understand the underlying mechanism, like I just mentioned. So for example, if we want to know the underlying mechanism for the paper for our study I just presented, we need to have the data of the students, right? Say who are the students of each researcher, and then also at least at the university level, who graduated from the department and really founded the startup. That kind of data set is very, very difficult to obtain, especially if you compare to survey data set. You can also ask about various kind of questions directly to understand why people do that, what's their motivation. Yeah, but for the secondary data, archival data, we are typically at a higher level. And then also sometimes the data availability, it's an issue. Say if it's not publicly available somewhere, then there's no way we collect that kind of data. Yeah.
What about Sooyeon?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very tough question there. I'm going to take a crack at it. So I think two difficulties that we faced, some of them have to do with, tracking down these very old treaty documents, right? So if you look at the Japanese documents, they look like they've been typed on some very ancient typewriter in Courier font, converting that and trying to, convert that to text that's recognizable. I think that has been time consuming, but not impossible. The other one is more having to do with non-English texts. Right, so most of the agreements that we analyze are English, but of course there's a whole body of trade agreements out there that are not English. So I've reached out to some who have, say, trade experts who are fluent in Spanish, for example. We can try to translate those, and I know that there are translation algorithms out there that will help us, right, to find some sort of convergence with the English text. So we're working on that, but we found that to be something of a challenge as well. Thank you.
So as a follow-up question, right, for academics, I mean, I'm not familiar with political science at all, but being kind of a trailblazer with using new methods, new computational methods, has that presented challenges in your review process or anything like that?
Oh, this is a great opportunity to invite you to, look at more of our of other political scientists' work. So our package that we use, Quantita, was developed by a political scientist over at LSE, Ken Benoit, who is, I believe, a trailblazer, right, in computational, so quantitative text analysis. So I am not a trailblazer by any, by any measure. I simply, use existing methods, are grateful for the ones that our colleagues have developed and try to apply them. But there's a whole village, it's not a village, a whole community, right, of data scientists who, are really looking for collaborators in computational social science.
Sinchen, anything to add?
Although I'm doing more theoretical work, but yeah, I'm open to see if there are data source that can validate my model. So from my perspective, so most of the work I've done is trying to develop a model to generate policy implications, which is difficult to difficult to run a large field experiment. But I hope that if we can somehow run a scale version of the field experiment to test the model predictions, that would be great.
Thank you. So building on a question, a comment that Sooyeon had earlier about collaborations, right? So how has it been kind of collaborating with people in industry? I mean, this is a question open to all, right? Collaborating with people from industry or from others. Other departments, right, to truly create this interdisciplinary work? What are some of the things that you wish you knew? Ke-Wei, sorry, I'm putting you on.
So maybe I go first. I think more or less related to my research, especially the original motivation. I think for either case, say working with industry or working with other department, other disciplines, I think the fundamental problem is the interests are not totally aligned. Yeah. So the industry, they care about commercial the applications with higher commercial values, right? They don't care about scientific rigor. They don't care about theory. Either the mathematical statistical theory or the organizational theory, any kind of theory. They just want something done, right? But for us to publish paper, it's a different thing. Yeah, I think it's quite different. And also for working interdisciplinary research, working with other departments, it's also the same. Say different discipline, they have different culture of doing research in terms of the procedure, the method, how to write paper, and the way to publish. And the different disciplines are very different. So I think that's also one, that's one hurdle for the interdisciplinary research. Because if for the co-authors, if they have the tenure or say publication pressure, and then different discipline those two disciplines are very different, then I think you will stop them from collaborating on a research project.
Thank you. Sooyeon and Jin Chen, feel free to jump in.
Well, also, I totally agree with Ke-Wei, and I want to add one more thing, which is, yes, so in some cases, when you conduct a collaboration with professors from other departments or other disciplines, they can provide you with this sort of like jump out of the box, give you some new angles to your problem. But based on my experience, also in many cases, because we have different kind of mindset, so that's also a very big obstacles in terms of communications and working on the same project. So that is also one hurdle that I think one need to overcome, or one initiate this kind of cross-disciplinary collaboration.
Thank you, Jin Chen. Sooyeon, anything to add?
I'd like to talk about Huang Ke-Wei, I think, who is Stanley Cox student, who I said earlier that showed up at my, just kind of cold emailed me, told me that, what she was working on this. And I realized some very fruitful collaborations can come from joint supervision of students across faculties. And so if you're interested in a substantive area like the UN Security Council debates, but you have far more sophisticated analytical techniques, I think they can be put to very good use, and students can be very valuable in linking our faculties together. Right. And when I go to, I've been attending the conference, the International Conference of Computational Social Science, it's the ICE2C2. S2, probably some of you have attended it. There I see such a diverse, right, community of scholars working on basically the same project. So I think collaboration is perfectly possible, and we don't have to share the same kind of analytical approach even, but I think the cross-fertilization, I think, is very, very possible as all of us become better trained over, and especially our students become better trained.
Certainly, I think a lot of students are always coming up with all the fresh ideas that we never thought of, and they're definitely the bridge to new ideas. Okay, Ke-Wei, we have a question from you for you from the audience. Will the locations of the conferences also have spillover effects too, or are the locations of conferences exogenously determined? Perhaps VC people will attend these conferences too.
Okay, yeah. So I think for most of there's several parts of the question. So first, actually in our full paper, one thing being criticized, I think it's also quite common in the business school journals or economics journals, is the identification strategies, or say stronger proof of causality. So we have a instrumental variable, but this is a little bit technical. So the conference location is our, say, one of our instrumental variable we try to explore. And then so I would say in our the conference location, it can be used as say the instrumental variable. Yeah, because when actually what we propose is the conference chairs, program chairs. They will be correlated with the location of the conference, and then the publication will be correlated with who is the program chairs. That's our hypothesis. So that's the instrumental variable. So from some angle, it's exogenously decided. From some angle, it's not totally exogenous. Okay, and then if you ask me whether you will have, say, spillover effect, I think it's a secondary reason. Yeah, the reason will still be the researchers or the university students, like I mentioned in the end. Yeah, and also as far as I know, I attended quite a number of those AI conferences. The applied one, there are some industry people they attend, but the more, how to say, if we don't include those researchers from the industry, for those more theoretical ones, there's very few venture capitalists, that kind of people will attend. How to say, so I don't think that matters that much. Yeah, did I answer all of your question?
Thanks. Yeah, I think I have all the questions. Okay, so I think we have one last question from the audience. Okay, so the question is around, I think it's a question for all three speakers. The question is around, how do you find topics or research topics that are suitable for computational social science? Okay, Sooyeon, go ahead.
Oh, read the journals. Read every day. Read all day.
Read the news. Most of my research ideas were generated from news. Those big time media magazine.
Yeah. So for me, I think the first, I do agree. We read the literatures. First, we learn from the computer science what's the new technology, new algorithms, and they are improving very, very fast. That's the challenge. And the ones we know, because my background is still like 80% is the social science. So we can borrow their new technologies to solve some of the problems in social science. It hasn't been solved, right? So from the social science perspective, we need to know the literature. So especially some of my research focus is about the methodologies. So a lot of methodologies in social science in different areas. I think it's not perfect now. Or there are something, it's not the original method is wrong, it's still something cannot be handled by the old method. So the new AI method, machine learning method, it can provide us some new solutions. So I think that's one angle for me to come out researching computational social science. And then the other, I think a lot of people are doing is there are a lot of NLP, various kind of techniques. right? The older social science papers are mostly by numbers. We analyze number, but a lot of the document hasn't been analyzed even today. So I think it just started maybe like only 10 years ago, researchers in social science started to use documents to do research. And so even today, I believe there are still a lot of opportunities. We can analyze various kind of documents to create new, important, interesting variables for us to do research in the traditional social science topics.
Ke-Wei. Well, okay, so with that, we've come to the end of our session. There's certainly a lot of opportunities with all the digital traces and archival data that we have left for computational social science. So thank you to the speakers for your insightful sharing. To our audience, we hope that you've enjoyed your session today. Thank you for participating, and we hope to see you again tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.